Welcome to Episode 2 of Saving Europe, a series that explores the lives and impact of two of history's unsung heroes. The decisive leadership shown by Columbanus in the 6th century and Robert Schuman in the 20th tipped the balance against the forces of cultural anarchy in their day. And so, joined by my two older sons, I'm on a 4,000-mile, 12-country post-Brexit odyssey to find out if there is anything we can learn from these two men for the troubled times in which we live. A quick reminder, if you haven't already subscribed, then please do so now, and remember to click the little bell so you can get notifications of the 50 new video shorts that we'll be releasing this year. Last time we saw Columbanus, a 6th century teenage runaway, getting a top-notch monastic mentoring under Abbot Sinnel on Lough Erne. And now we find this budding Bible scholar and literary genius taking up his first academic post in one of Ireland's new monastic cities. Welcome to Bangor. This is the original LA, Los Angeles, because that's literally what Bangor means. It was called this because Patrick saw a vision of angels singing here a century before. He called it Vallis Anglorum, and no wonder, for by the time Columbanus arrives, there are 2,000 young people living and worshipping God on this site. It was founded and run by a tough-minded ex-soldier of Pictish extraction called Comgal. And we can forget the hippie commune image of tree-hugging mystics. This was the Christian equivalent of a special forces boot camp. These men were the descendants of a hardy, pagan, warrior race trying to resolve the great monastic tension of their time, whether a monk should be a docti or a sancti, a scholar or a saint. And the answer they came up with was both. Columban's 7th century Italian biographer puts it like this. At this time, all Ireland was resounding with the praises of the new monastery of Bangor, of the sanctity and learning of its founder, St. Congal, and of the severity of his discipline. Hundreds of young men were daily leaving their homes to place themselves under his guidance, and carried away with the general enthusiasm, Columban bade farewell to Lough Erne, slung his satchel of books over his shoulder, and wended his way to the Ards of Ulster, Jonas of Susa. I called into the North Down Museum to ask volunteer and expert Tom Bowl to tell me more.
When Columbanus came to Bangor, he would have seen a monastery that had been well established, under the control of Comgal, a very highly educated, knowledgeable man. He would have seen a very broad spectrum of work going on, with particularly the emphasis on the teaching of the scriptures and the theological training of the monks. That was a primary object, and he would have seen almost like a university, a lot of diversity in what they were teaching, from languages like Latin and Greek, the sciences, mathematics and geometry, astronomy. Columbanus was an academic. He taught himself Greek apparently. He loved languages. He loved study. Day life would have started with the monks getting out of their little cells, as we have behind me here, starting at 4 o'clock probably in the morning, going into the oratory at 6 o'clock for the morning prayers and study. Every 3 hours after that they returned for the same Bible study and teaching and singing. Comgal loved music, so there's a very big choir here at a time, anything up to 1,200 people, and they sang for something like 12 to 15 years, 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. Columban would have been very enthused by what he saw. In fact, the reason he came to Bangor was because Bangor was so well known throughout Europe. It was well known throughout Ireland and Britain. So this was the place to be. It's a bit like Oxford and Cambridge now. People say those are the universities to go to. Bangor was the university to go to.
In fact, the school here became known as the light of the world. And in line with other foundations, Bede tells us that the Irish received everyone, that is, national as well as international students, and took care to supply them with daily food without cost, to furnish them with books for their studies, and tuition free of charge. I wanted to explore the area where the abbey had once stood, and to get a feel for the place that had once been such a cultural force in Europe.
Okay, so that's 3,000 monks, 3 to a cell. That's 1,000 of those wicker huts. This whole place must have been absolutely littered. It would just look like a refugee camp, a small wicker city full of students and singers and scholars and saints. I think in my own lifetime, the digital revolution is probably the nearest equivalent that we have. You know, and just as young techies flock to Silicon Valley today, so the young men of Ireland, in their thousands, flocked here to Bangor 1,500 years ago to be part of a great information revolution that was sweeping all of their nation. Well, it's certainly extraordinary to think that this 12th century wall of Malachi's refectory is the last remaining relic in our world today of that lost time in Bangor, the golden age, when this was one of the premier culture-shaping engines in all of Europe. Reminds me of that Byron poem where he looks at Newstead Abbey with these rather immortal words as he gazes on those ruins. Hail to thy pile, more honoured in thy fall than modern mansions in their pillared state. Proudly majestic frowns thy vaulted hall, scowling defiance on the blasts of fate.
But those devastating Viking raids are still 2 centuries in the future. Back in the late 580s, Columban was feeling the urge that would one day almost come to characterize his countrymen, and that was the call to take his trade abroad. And so back at the museum, I asked Tom how this news went down.
When he felt this call to take the white martyrdom overseas, how was that greeted by the abbot?
It was not well greeted. Columbanus being the sort of the right-hand man, for a person to lose a right hand would have been a major problem. Not only that, but Congal also knew if Columbanus went, Gaul would go with him. Gaul was very close to Columbanus, and some of the another 10 of his very senior people. However, I think at the end, being the man he was determined he was going to Europe. I think we have to give Columbanus the fact that he respected Congal to the point that he was prepared to do whatever Congal decided. And that says a lot for the man, because he could have up and gone. He could have gone. But he had the blessing of Congal, and that was important to him.
And so the day finally came when Columbanus, his best friend Gaul, and 10 others made their way to the rocky harbour just below the monastery. And that was where I was heading next, to a boat in what is now Ireland's largest marina. I wanted to catch that historic, no-turning-back moment.
Might make a nice memory of just shell. Nice little memory. These are the rocks, probably where he left from. Needs to be enough deep water to get a boat in. Well, it feels. I say we feel rather small out here in this harbour. I wonder how Columbanus felt leaving from here. Just at the breakwater. This is called the Eisenhower Pier because the Great Armada once left from here for the Normandy beaches, which is actually not far from where Columbanus ended up. Just out there. In the waters out there, that's where the Titanic had its maiden voyage too. Jonas records that Columban was, after many years in the monastery, longed for foreign lands, to embrace what the Irish called the white martyrdom. White because of the tips of the waves, the wave crests. Red martyrdom, of course, would be death. Green martyrdom was to go and live in a hermit's cave. But it was the ultimate in a voluntary exile from your homeland forever. And they were prepared to undertake that. He was in his late 40s, about the same age that Patrick was when he undertook his journey. About my age. No, we're not so old in our 40s. We've got our strength, a bit of learning behind us, a bit of grit we've learned to endure. He had his magnificent 12, including Gaul, Atala, the Burgundian, Columbanus Jr., and the whole host of young guys and even old guys. One of the guys was Gaul's brother, who became known as Dicol, was in his 50s, so not a spring chicken. And with them he set off from this very shore to the continent for what would become one of the most famous and productive missionary journeys ever undertaken in the Western world.
And it was also my turn to leave for the continent too. Taking my two older sons, Tom and Will, I headed to Brittany to explore the places named after Columbanus, trying to find out exactly where he landed. On our way down the Normandy coast, we explored the picturesque port of Honfleur, which, with its twin sister Harfleur, was under British control for extended periods of the 14th and 15th century. It seems, even in those days, a few decades with a toehold in Europe was all we English could manage. Next, we visited the Normandy beaches of World War II, where the largest invasion fleet in military history arrived, much as Columban did, to liberate a continent overrun by calamity and tyranny. We also got a taste of the price of peace and the extraordinary sacrifices made to preserve the freedoms that we still enjoy. Further inland, we got a chance to explore the beautiful town of Bayeux, where that famous Saxon-made tapestry celebrated an invasion in the opposite direction 1,000 years before. William the Conqueror's mace-wielding brother had once been bishop here, and the stone nearby at Caen had been shipped to Britain to build some of our most iconic fortresses and cathedrals. As the sun dipped in the west, we also cycled across the marshy flatlands toward the iconic Mont San Michel. It's only a few miles across the bay from one of Columbanus's possible landing sites.
And it's not altogether irrelevant, because this was originally founded by two Irishmen in about 670, so not long after Columbanus.
Next morning, we finally arrived at the fishing village where for generations the people had prayed in times of drought at a granite cross dedicated to Columbanus.
Well, we're here finally in Cancale. Columbanus was reputed to have landed somewhere on the San Malo area, a place notorious for corsairs and pirates, but well known to the people of Cornwall and Britain. There was a lot of trade between these two areas. So I think somewhere up in the town we're going to find a granite cross. So we're going to go and have a look for that. Let's go and see. There's no inscription, and it's obviously quite modern. It's a bit disappointing, really, because it was a landing, a little bit like the landings we saw in Normandy. I'm thinking about the invasion. It was no less an invasion just because it didn't come with guns. They came with ideas that would help in the rehabilitation of a continent after the collapse of the Roman Empire. There's a little town 2 miles behind us, so we'll go up and have a look at that town, see if we can find any clues. Here it is, a little village named after Columbanus. Question: is it because he was here and he founded a monastery, or is it because he just became so popular in the Middle Ages and, you know, news reached back here? And, you know, there was another one in the Vendée down south of Nantes
another town dedication. And there's quite a few in Italy as well. But quite how these come about, I don't know. So here we are. This is like a town centre. Ah, who's this? Who is this? I'll just take that off. There's the guy. The sun on his chest is because of his mother's prophecy that she received when he was born, and the dove, that's what his name means. Oh, and that's a car behind me. We called into the 18th century Église Saint Columban to see if we could find out any more. But these guys look like nothing else in Europe at the time. In fact, they look more like the Druids who they'd replaced or displaced, should I say, in their own culture, or were displacing. So I'd just like to read what George Medlake said in his book about the appearance of the monks. Some of this is disputed, particularly the tonsure, but it's worth listening to. He says this: they wore a coarse outer garment, in colour as it came from the fleece, and under a white tunic of finer stuff, and they were tonsured from ear to ear across the front of the head, while the long hair behind flowed down on the back, and their eyelids were painted and stained black. Each had a long cambuta, or a curved-headed staff, and slung from the shoulder a leather water bottle, and a wallet for food, and a satchel which contained their precious treasures, a book or two and some relics. But these two villages are really later traditions. When we read Jonas, he describes the landing with two very specific phrases: Britannica Ava and Licinus Britannicus, that is, the region or the bay of the Bretons. Now, these are exactly the words he also uses later to describe the region at the outflow of the Loire. And it's here that I find a bay, a village, and a chapel named after Saint Columban. There's the point of Saint Columban here. There is the plage de Saint Columban and the village. And it's right under the Elimon, the Carnac stones, which is the largest pagan sacred space, certainly in Europe, possibly the largest space in the world. There are 10,000 stones. And so the more I'm looking at this, the more I'm thinking, I just want to get there. Because when I started to look at this village of St. Columban, I can see a circular structure, a circular field pattern, certainly on the south side of the village. And that's very much in line with what we would expect to see of an Irish monastic foundation. We've just seen the sign for St. Columban. Let's see if we can find it. This is St. Columban's chapel, and there's a beach named after him too. The bulk of the current church is from a 16th century rebuild, but its setting on the highest ground on a small peninsula in this tiny village felt ancient to me. Very primitive pictures of boats. Probably Columbanus coming over the seas and landing here. Actually, despite the same red writing of Columbanus' name on a corner, experts now believe that the graffiti is more likely depicting British carracks attacking this area just after the Reformation in 1548. Of the church, there were two holes where people with mental illness could place their heads and be healed. I must say this does feel a little more like what I was expecting, certainly a little better than Cancale. This feels ancient, and there are Renaissance and medieval elements in this building. But there's obviously a strong association with Columbanus here. A village, the church, the beach named after him. So we'll go and have a look at the beach. So they arrived here in the Morbihan. Very shallow here, you can see beyond me. They're farming the clams. We look on the rocks, it's absolutely bursting with life. So this could have been the place where Columbanus started. Up here, the adventure lies. So, having arrived, we're talking about 590, Columbanus makes his way across the Villeneuve River into what is the land of the Merovingian Franks, where he's going to have to negotiate with the rulers, the family of Theodoric, Brunhilde, who are going to offer him a small patch of ground at Angre, 7 miles from Luxeuil. It is extraordinary to think we are walking in the same place, perhaps, as Columbanus. None of us know where our lives will lead us, or everything looks uncertain for him at this point. There's no typeset script for his life. He's just going. He has this supreme confidence. That's what's so extraordinary. And of course, as we know, it paid off. But it wasn't without cost to his own personal relationships and to himself. There's a lot of sadness and heartbreak in his letters, but all that lies in front of him. And it's in front of us too as we follow Columbanus east across the land of the Merovingian Franks. So join us next time on Saving Europe as we see these Irish emigres establish their first 3 monastic startups near the Vosges Mountains, and also begin to lock horns with a Dark Age dynasty that frankly makes the Sopranos or Game of Thrones clans appear anemic. All this and more next time on Saving Europe. Thanks for watching. And do let me know what you liked, what you didn't like, what you'd like to see more of. Just drop them in the comments section. Also, if you find this content helpful, please help me by subscribing to the channel. Remember also that this journey was part of the research for a book which uses the lives of Columbanus and Schuman as an analytical lens to view the course of Western civilization. Do follow the links below to find out more. Thanks for watching.